To begin, a rabbit jumps over the moon. What does it see with its one red eye? A very tired academic. I'm not gonna say I really wanted to like this, because in all honesty, I don't know what I wanted from it. Man of Steel came off an amazing run by one of my favourite writers and artists. Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason's Superman run is something I'll probably be pointing at for many years as a fantastic example of Superman done right in the modern age. Anything coming after it, I'm going to naturally have high expectations for. But when you have a writer like Brian Michael Bendis, Bendis is a writer I very much grew up with. I read his Ultimate Spider-Man run for a long time. I didn't get to Miles being the new Spider-Man, but I spent a good few years of my life enjoying his work. I read a lot of his major events at Marvel. I really enjoy House of M, even revisiting it today. But as time has gone by, I found problems with how Bendis writes that I just can't ignore. With a whole new universe and characters to work in, I'd hoped that Bendis would use this opportunity to change up how he writes. It's not like he has an obligation to, but with how vocal some of his detractors have been with his recent work, it couldn't hurt to try something new. Try and make a distinction between Marvel Bendis and DC Bendis. And I think he may have tried here. There is definitely something different about how he approached this project, but I'm having some trouble putting my finger on it. The choice of calling the story Man of Steel is a very clever callback. I'm curious as to whether it was the DC higher-ups or Bendis himself. In 1986, DC released another 6-part series called Man of Steel. This came out just after Crisis on Infinite Earths, during a time when DC's continuity was being almost completely rewritten. A lot of origin stories were retold around this time, or just after, like Batman Year One by Frank Miller or Shazam The New Beginning by Roy Thomas. But Man of Steel was written by John Byrne. Like Bendis, Byrne was incredibly well known for being a Marvel writer and artist, being exclusively Marvel from around 1977 until 1985. When he suddenly left Marvel, DC signed him to an exclusive contract, giving him the keys to Superman, starting with a 6-part series called Man of Steel. Does that sound familiar? Calling Bendis' opening Superman story Man of Steel is very clever, especially if you know that piece of history. Otherwise, it's a cute reference to one of Superman's nicknames. As far as I can tell, this is the only connection between the two stories, given Byrne's story was 6 separate stories, told at different points in time, all set around the time Superman came into existence. Getting his costume, moving to Metropolis, meeting Batman, Lois, and Lex Luthor. Byrne's story very heavily influenced other Superman stories in its structure. An example is Superman for All Seasons by Tim Sale and Jeph Loeb from 1998. While Bendis' Man of Steel is a 6-issue story, that could have probably been only 4 issues at most and acts solely as a setup for what Bendis wants to do with the character immediately going forward. To sum up the plot as best as I can, Bendis' Man of Steel has a new villain arriving on Earth by the name of Rogol Zaar. He arrives with the intent of wiping out all Kryptonian life, including Superman, Kara, and the people of the bottle city of Kandor. He reveals to Superman that the reason Krypton was destroyed was because of him, that he plans to do the same to Earth since it's been tainted by Kryptonian life. While the plot is going on, Superman is preoccupied by thoughts of his family, what has happened to Lois and John, as well as the sudden reappearance of his father, Jor-El. If there are 2 big problems with Man of Steel, it's the pacing and the dialogue. Bendis has been known for having a pacing problem for many years, with it being most noticeable when reading issue by issue instead of waiting for the story to come out at the end, also known as trade waiting. He tends to front-load an issue with information and only hooks you in the last few pages. However, when trade waiting, this problem is difficult to notice as you have the payoff for the setup immediately. He knows how to pace a rise and fall, but in Man of Steel he has a very different problem. His pacing is ruined through constant repetition. While action is happening, the reader is engrossed in the story. We are thrown into constant reminders of what Superman is thinking about. A flashback to what's happening to his family. A reminder every now and then can be very effective, but the way Bendis handles it, it goes from compelling storytelling to a constant annoyance. It becomes harder and harder to care what happened to John and Lois, as it's the same information being parroted to us right up until the last 2 issues. There's a small line during a battle where the Justice League become aware of what Rogel is planning to do, and Green Lantern asks Superman, "Where is your son?" The look on Superman's face is all the detail that we needed to make that impactful. We didn't need to see the same piece of flashback 10 times. When it comes to dialogue, the problems largely come from how Bendis scripts characters. Primarily, Bendis is known for writing young characters, typically teenagers or young adults. He has a very specific way of writing them. The problem is when he applies this to characters who shouldn't act this way. For example, John is written to be a young teen, but the John we know at this point is around 9 to 10. A few offhanded comments made by him towards the end of the story feel very unnatural for the John we know, as is his worry. The worry that drives him in the story is already addressed in its original story, Super Sons of Tomorrow. Two more characters this problem really seems to affect are both Green Lantern and the Flash. Both at times act much younger than they are, and while it's not out of character for them to be a little childish, it feels incredibly out of place. The artwork is strong throughout, even with the constant switching of artists. It can be jarring at times to suddenly be confronted by a completely different rendering, but all the artists involved are very strong, with the standouts of Ivan Reis, Jason Freiberg, and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. A minor fault with the book, and I do mean minor, is the book's use of font. When the book tries to portray information directly from a newspaper, the font drastically changes to a serif style. While this makes sense, it feels jarring and ugly, very out of place. A minor annoyance at best, but still noticeable. The book is a missed opportunity. This could have been a fantastic start to Bendis' Superman career, planting a flag into the ground and proving to his detractors that he knows who Superman is and he is here to show his take on the character. What it ended up being is a very forced change that was blatant in what it was trying to do. A stretched out but thin experience. Its blatancy is further seen when exploring the first few issues of Bendis' new Superman run, arguably what Man of Steel was building up to. While Man of Steel was only Bendis' first step with the character, it's a step that inspires very little confidence. Hey, so I'm coming in here off script. I finally picked up Man of Steel. I finally read it, and as you can tell, I'm not that happy. I did pick up the first 6 issues of Superman the other day to see how that kind of played into that, and I'm not happy. It's not great. Really, it's not. I'd argue the Superman issues were stronger than Man of Steel because he didn't have the jumping around, but it's still not. But I'm fine. I'm really fine. I'm fine. I wonder what Batman's doing lately.